Hi everyone and welcome to Real Life Talks. I'm your host Yvonne Heath, author of the book Love Your Life to Death and founder of the I Just Showed Up movement. So I have a very special guest with me today, Meredith Fryia. Hello Meredith.
Hi.
We're going to chat about something that we all need to talk about and we need information on. We need to be educated, but we're going to start with a short clip and then we'll be right back.
I never thought opioids would affect someone close to me.
That people would judge and make her feel invisible.
That he'd be ashamed to talk about his opioid use.
It happened to my husband.
Our daughter.
My best friend.
This story could be yours. Every day in Canada, 11 people die of an opioid overdose. The Government of Canada is taking action. Help end stigma. A message from the Government of Canada.
So that clip, of course, we're talking about the opioid crisis, which is a national emergency, isn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I know there's been a lot of talk about it, but not everybody understands or knows. So if we could start with, tell us a little bit about who you are, your role, and what is the opioid crisis?
Okay, so I'm the manager of addiction services at Canadian Mental Health Association, Simcoe County. And so we provide addiction treatment services out of that agency. As far as the opioid crisis, I think what we've seen happen is that it started with when OxyContin was widely prescribed, and we saw the effects of that, where there was a number of people that became addicted to that substance.
So that's a pain medication.
That's a pain medication,
yes. Okay.
And as time, that's an opioid. And as time went on, and that there was changes made to that, the government took that particular medication off the market. And then what we started to see was illicit fentanyl coming into a number of communities across North America, and being cut or mixed in with other substances. So somebody might buy, for example, what they think is cocaine, but there's actually fentanyl or even carfentanil, which is a higher dosage fentanyl that's been mixed into the substance that they've purchased.
Okay.
And as a result, that's just sort of become extremely prolific, and now that's across the country, across the continent, that's become an issue and become a major problem, and that death rate has been extremely high with this crisis. And so we've seen death rates like we've never seen with substance use, and certainly so the high rates of death, high rates of hospitalizations, emergency department visits, of course, and we've seen significant rates of that in our region as well. So.
It's so frightening. So OxyContin's gone fentanyl, which is another pain medication.
Yes, OxyContin, the actual drug oxycodone still exists, but in terms of what we're looking at for this crisis now is more about illicit fentanyl, which is fentanyl that has been mixed into drugs that are purchased on the street.
Right. So I just want to go back to people think they're getting cocaine. Even just that scares me. Cocaine. I mean, I've never, I wasn't a perfect angel growing up. I'm not going to lie. There was some excessive drinking. I won't let my children hear that. But these drugs, the cocaine just seems to be something that people do at parties, and it's you just think it's fun. And
well, I think it's really important to know that when we look at addiction and substance use, and when somebody gets into the place where they're really addicted to substance, that's really not about the party anymore, right?
Okay.
That's really about substance use as a way to cope, and it's often a way to cope with things that are really challenging, really upsetting, really difficult for that person to manage. And so when I work with a client, the first thing that I look at is, tell me how the substance is helping. Tell me the benefits that you're getting from the substance, because that will determine what the underlying need is. So for example, if someone says to me, when I drink, my anxiety is much lower, it's much more manageable, then that anxiety management is a legitimate underlying need, and if that person stops drinking, that need is still going to exist.
Of course.
So they're going to need to find another way, a healthier way to manage their anxiety, but ultimately that's what it's about, right? So it's less about the alcohol and more about managing the anxiety. And so that's with any kind of issue. So we also know that there's high rates of, when we look at substance use, there's a high correlation with the history of trauma, emotional pain, medicating emotional pain, and that emotional pain relief that people get from substances, which can play a really reinforcing role in them continuing to use those substances.
Well, of course, and if you don't reach out for help, right? Because in the morning, after the high has worn off, after whatever, and that problem still exists, and you have no coping skills or strategies, and you don't have, and it's just so frustrating to me that it seems that people think, you know, I shouldn't reach out for help, or if they spiral down and now they're using, so then they're ashamed or embarrassed, or they feel judged or isolated, then they don't want to admit. And we've all been in those dark places, right?
And I think there's so much stigma associated with addiction, and it's a huge barrier to people reaching out for support, and largely because people see substance use as a choice. They're just choosing to do that, or they're choosing to just go out and have fun as opposed to deal with their issues, and that's not what it's about. It's really about what's happened to this person, and this has been the way that they're managing to get through. And so oftentimes substances are the way that that person is managing to function in their daily life or get through, and then it ends up becoming, you know, problematic and a significant issue. But ultimately, it's really about that underlying piece of where's that emotional pain, what does that look like for that person, and how can they access support to help and heal from that.
Yes, and you don't know this part of my journey, but one of the greatest, I left my nursing career, wrote a book, I am a speaker, I'm very passionate about sharing my message, because we are a society that's very ill-prepared for grief as it shows up throughout life: divorce, diagnosis, job loss, getting dumped, failing a grade, and that's all also contributes to needing to numb our pain. And our older son, Tyler, went down a dangerous road of drugs and addiction in high school. And that was, I realized I was ill prepared for my own grief of being a mother, the mother of a son with an addiction. And we're trying to help, and we, you know, we couldn't reach him. And I would say to any parent, anyone trying to help someone with an addiction, you need further support. I said I had addiction outreach on speed dial. I needed that guidance. You know, we were good people. Like and my husband's a paramedic. I'm a nurse. And it was looking at his underlying issues of, you know, not feeling like he was doing well in school, and then he had a snowboarding dream, and he had a huge knee injury. He didn't know how to cope. But you need outside help. You need your village. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. I'm not embarrassed to share that story. It happened. I'm sad, and it was hard, but I also realized how ill-prepared we all are, right?
Well, and I think the other piece is that the stigma is generated because people have a particular vision in mind when we talk about addiction. And addiction crosses all walks of life.
It really does.
And so it can be anybody, anywhere, at any time. And so really getting rid of that idea around what do you think of in your mind when you say substance user or addiction, and getting to the place of these are people who are in pain, who need support, and finding that compassion and that empathy around that.
Absolutely. And you know what? Even if you're talking about in your mind, you see the junkie on the street shooting heroin, at one point that person was a baby, and then a child, and
that person is suffering.
That person is suffering, and something happened along the way, right? And they turn to this hard place to cope.
Well, and that's because oftentimes substances are the relief from that for a while, right? They provide that, and so that's reinforcing to the person that they get that relief from that pain, even if it's temporary, even if it's momentary. But that relief from that overwhelming sense of pain is part of that process. And just as a society, as we move towards the idea around getting away from, for example, at our agency, we don't use the terms addict or alcoholic, because those terms have, you know, if you ask anybody what their definition of addict is, you'll have 10 different definitions, and none of them will necessarily be accurate, because there is no specific definition around that. It really is about, this is a person who uses substances, and there's often a lot of assumptions that go along with those labels. And so labels create assumptions, and those assumptions may or may not be accurate for every particular person, and that creates stigma. So if I think that an alcoholic steals, then I'm going to be afraid of anybody who's around me who's drinking. That's right. So I think it's really important to if we start moving towards a new neutral language around, and understanding that at the heart of it, these are people, right, as opposed to their
and they all have
level.
value.
And they all have value. Absolutely.
Everyone has value, and everyone matters, and everyone is worth saving.
That's right.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that's another piece. Like, you know, people get. We talked a little about the kits, and I have Naloxone. I have my kit, and I know some people feel like these are the kits that if someone has overdosed
On opioids specifically.
on opioids, right? And I think that's another important information, because this isn't. Sadly, my husband, who's a paramedic, had heard that there was this party and kids who were drinking too much were thinking that Narcan was going to help them.
Yeah.
And so this is also part of educating people. This is to save someone who has had an opioid overdose,
Right.
fentanyl, carfentanil, something.
Any kind of opioid, so if that's morphine, heroin, hydromorphone, any of those kinds of any kind of opioid, naloxone, if given in time, can reverse the overdose, and given in sufficient quantity, depending on the person.
Right.
So it's very important that if people know someone who has a substance use issue, or if they have a substance use issue themselves, particularly if they're using substances that are purchased on the street.
Yes.
Because although that we'll say this only reverses opioid, someone might buy what they think is cocaine that could turn out to be fentanyl. So someone may feel like they don't choose to use opioids, but what they're buying may in fact be mixed with opioids. So it's really important that everybody get a kit, have a kit just in case, know how to use it in the event that anything happens, so that if somebody is an overdose, this potentially could reverse that overdose and save their life.
So my son, who now lives out in Kelowna, BC, is doing well, but his friend, Drew Jones, and I asked Drew's mom if I could share that story. And on December 29th, he, sorry, it makes me cry, overdosed at a party, thinking, it was cocaine or whatever he thought. Sure. And I mean, this is a young, wonderful person, right? And that's what people have to realize. So if I would have had this, I would have loved to use it and save his life. And I think there was an attempt and it didn't work. So. Again, that whole stigma of, they are choosing to use, or and these are other people in pain or making a wrong decision, right?
Yeah. Or this may be the best decision they know how to make in that moment, right?
In that moment,
moment to manage what they're going through.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So these kits, I think we should just show how simple it is. And it's, I love that, well, you know what, you're the expert.
I'm not an expert.
Well, more than me.
But this is a nasal naloxone kit. So it comes with 2 doses of the naloxone, and these are very easy to use. Basically, the person just peels the backing paper off, inserts it in the person's nostril, and you would have the person lying down with their neck elevated a little bit, and one quick push. Right as far as into the nostril as it can go, one quick push. And then, obviously, before you would ever give naloxone, you'd be calling 911 before that happens, so that the paramedics are on their way. And this will hopefully be able to help that person in the meantime. The kits always come with a pair of gloves. Very important to wear a pair of gloves. The newer kits also come with a mask, so that you can do CPR. So if while you're waiting for the paramedics, after you've given the naloxone, if the person has not started breathing, then starting CPR, chest compressions and breathing, rescue breathing. There is in the kit, in case people forget, there is a very handy graphic with the 5 steps of how to manage an opioid overdose.
It's very user-friendly.
It's very user-friendly and very simple to use. And basically, if within 2 to 3 minutes this has not restored breathing, you can give the second dose in the other nostril.
So it's very user-friendly, easy, and I'm letting people know that I am carrying this in my purse. I have a really big purse, so I'm able to do that because if I can save a life, I will.
Right? And our agency, Canadian Mental Health Association, distributes these kits as well. So they can go to any CMHA office and pick up a kit.
Or drugstore.
For free. Or drugstore.
I got this at the drugstore.
Or the health unit.
And it was wonderful because the pharmacist took me aside and gave me instructions and talked to me about it. And it's about harm reduction. And I know that there are many people who have been saved by Narcan who have a second chance at life and are really embracing that. But that's not for us to judge either, is it?
No, absolutely not. No, and I think it's really important that we have this. This is a harm reduction strategy to save lives, and then looking at what other supports can be put in place to help people who are struggling with substance use.
So I have to ask, and I'm sure you probably don't know the answer because you can't get into the brain or mind of a people who sell drugs, do we still call them pushers? Like I'm from way back. I don't know the new lingo.
Typically, the term usually is drug dealer.
Okay, so
somebody
a drug
who sells
dealer.
Somebody who sells drugs. Yeah.
They know that people are dying, and they're putting this carfentanil in there. I mean, why? I don't.
So the piece with fentanyl is that fentanyl is very potent, and carfentanil is obviously extremely potent.
Yes.
And you can mix a very small amount of that into a very large amount of drugs that might not be potent and make it feel like really strong drugs. So
they really want that.
So then you can use a lot of filler. You can essentially increase your profit margin.
There you go.
Using a very small amount of this to mix into a large amount of lesser drug or filler, and to make it feel very, very pure. So it's not that people who are selling drugs are trying to kill their clients. It's really about the fact that this is a way to increase their profit margin to make more money. It's business.
And if some people die, well,
I think that not being able to get into the mind of that, I'm sure that there's nobody that wants to have that happen. I think the piece is that it's also not done in any measured way. So people would be mixing this in, but it's not necessarily mixed in so that every dose that goes out gets the same amount of whatever. So this dose might be fine, and this dose might be fatal.
That's what happened
right?
to Drew,
and that's what happens is that depending on where it was mixed and how it was mixed and what portion that person got, that portion might be the portion that's causing an overdose, and somebody else might use out of that same batch and not have the overdose because they didn't have as much fentanyl in their particular amount. So
when people are doing these drugs, it's Russian roulette, right?
It can be, yes. It's very
really
dangerous.
It's so dangerous.
It's
My
to know
goodness.
the landscape now, that the landscape has changed.
It's changed.
And that people need to know that risk is out there, and need to make sure that they have kits, need to know that, ensure that you may not know what you're purchasing. You may not know what's in your drug. That's right. And your dealer may not know, because it may be cut several dealers back. And so there's no way to know when that was caught, who knows what's in it. So it's about really being aware that that's what's going on. Make sure that you have your Naloxone, and be aware of the resources should you choose to access them, what the resources are that are out there.
And I just want to say, don't do drugs. I'm so naive, but it's if people are using because they feel isolated or they are in pain, there's just so many wonderful resources. And the truth is, I have been in the situation in my 27 years of nursing. I drank red wine many times when I felt very, a lot of pain. I've had many patients who have died, and my husband would get the call and he'd hear, just hysterical crying. I said, okay, I'll get the bath and the wine. And I would have, a few glasses of wine. That's not, I was numbing my pain. I didn't have the coping skills and strategies to. You can feel your pain, and I promise if you acknowledge it, allow it, and move through it and get help, you will get to the other side. Because I 3.5 years ago, I quit drinking because I couldn't be telling people I need to walk my talk.
Right.
Feel your pain and get help. You don't have to do this alone.
Right. And I think, our agency supports a goal of harm reduction as well. So if people come into the agency and they aren't at the place where they want to stop using, but they want to reduce their use, we will support that absolutely 100%. We work with people no matter what their goal is. So
that's really important to know, that if they come to the agency, and that's so important, and they say, I'm still using, you're not going to say, sorry, we can't help you until you don't.
No, absolutely not. We always, from a client-centered standpoint around, where the client is at, what they feel they're able to do right now. Because if you push somebody to do something they're not feeling they're ready to do, that can also be very detrimental. So we're always at the place of, what is your goal? What would you like to do? What do you feel is a good fit for you right now? And we will help you to work through that and work with that. But we will not decide that goal for you.
Okay.
We won't tell you what you need to do.
Support them where they are.
Yes.
And that's Canadian Mental Health Association in any town, any city?
So our particular branch is the Simcoe County branch. So that's Barrie, Orillia, Midland, and Collingwood that we operate out of.
Yes.
And so, not all the CMHAs provide addiction treatment services, but ours does specifically. But in our agency, definitely, some people might come in and say, I'm just looking to use in a safer manner. So we also provide needle exchange kits. We provide safe inhalation kits. So we are looking to help people in whatever way we can, and with wherever they're at in what they feel they're able to do at this point. And so we always, make sure that we're respectful of whatever that goal is.
And I know there is a 24-hour crisis line
is, yes.
that people can access, and they can find out where they can get help.
Absolutely.
What is that number? Do you know it?
Off the top of my head.
Off the top of that's okay. We'll put it on the website. I know I have it here somewhere, and I probably can't read it because I don't have my glasses on. But there is, and you can see that online.
Mental health crisis line. Yeah,
it's everywhere. So, going back to community and how we can educate ourselves and prevention, and what are the best steps that we as community members can take to educate our children, ourselves, and to prevent this. It's so frightening.
It is. I think the biggest thing is to start the conversation early, and to also send the message that if you're struggling with something, it's okay to talk about it.
Yes.
We don't have to hide it away and put it under the carpet and make sure nobody knows about it. That it's really important to talk about issues. It's okay to ask for help. That it's okay to say, I have a problem, or this is what I need.
Be confused.
To be confused,
Right?
but to also make sure that we're open about having the conversation, that we don't perpetuate that stigma even further, so that people or our children feel like, I can't tell mom and dad about this, I can't tell anybody about this. Exactly, exactly, yeah, that's right. So if we send that message that we're open and we're here to hear that information, because that's how people access support. People don't access support when they feel like they're going to be judged, or they feel like somebody's going to be really angry, or then they won't come forward with it and they won't talk about it. So opening up that lens so that people understand that, and understand that they can start talking about it, and that every person will find the support that fits for them. So there's no one particular treatment modality that fits for every single person, single person.
Yes, right, yeah.
So that there's lots of different forms of treatment, and different things will work for different people. And so it's about people finding what really works for them, but support is key. Whatever that support looks like, whether that's a counselor, whether that's residential treatment, whether that's a self-help group, whether that's just friends and family, physician, whomever, that support is really key, because addiction is about isolation, and that process of recovery is really about connecting again.
And connection is key for, it really is. And peer support, I think, is so important in whatever we're dealing with. I've had several guests talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, which is another thing that certainly can lead to addictions, right? That you just feel like there's too much pain. But we know other people have gone through this. And like I said, we're nice parents. We were a nice family. It happened in our family. And I know, I remember one patient saying to me that they had, I think it was whatever drug, it was a tablet for pain, whatever injury they had. They said, I had one and I was addicted. I was addicted. I think, isn't that so, it's that potent and that's scary.
Well, and I think it depends on the person and their situation. But, first experiences with a substance can be very powerful. I had a client once who didn't use substances till he was 35 years old. And he used what happened to be an opioid, and said, I felt like I could take a deep breath for the first time in my life. So if you're 35 and you've never felt like you can take a deep breath, that's going to be very powerful. That's going to be a very powerful reinforcer to continue using that, because you've found something that's given you that relief, right?
Yes. And
so absolutely. I think that it depends on the person. It depends on their circumstances. Sometimes we're coping with emotional pain. We don't even recognize it or realize it. And so very often, people will find a substance that helps them put that away for a little bit. And that's going to be something that's going to continue that cycle. And so it really is about knowing that when people are using substances, it's not because they're trying to party or because they don't care. Or it's really about they're just trying to manage with that and trying to manage whatever they're struggling with.
And I mean, I do believe there are situations at a party and you think, woohoo, let's have a good time.
That's a bit different than addiction.
It's different from addiction, but the result could also be your death.
Yes.
Right? Like
in the landscape that we're dealing with now.
In the landscape that we're dealing with. It's not, it's a very different place to be in. It's very frightening. And the whole peer pressure thing, let's just eliminate that. But back to anyone in crisis, and I just so want them to know, like, there are so many things that when you feel so isolated and alone and that you can't get through your pain, I promise you, there are so many wonderful ways.
Yeah, there are lots of different types of support out there, and so making that reaching out, and that can be really difficult for people to make that first reaching out attempt, right? To really feel that they can do that. And so if sometimes it might be that their first person they access support with might be a family member or a friend, and if that person can help them to say, it's okay to reach out for support, do you want some help to reach out for support? That's how we can help people. And sometimes it's also about sitting and understanding that person may not be ready yet to reach out for support. And so knowing that too, that we can't force that to happen. And that's a struggle sometimes for those of us that have to watch that. But I think it's really important to be able to make sure that the person knows they exist. These exist for when and if you're ready.
When and if we're here, we care. Absolutely. There's somebody that cares. If you are alone and you don't have your village, you don't have support, there are people who care deeply, right?
Absolutely.
So what about people supporting those with addictions, families? Do you have someone, like, can we reach out to?
So we do provide services for significant others as well. So that might be a family member, a spouse, parent. So definitely we would provide support for family members as well. They have their own process of going, in terms of recovery and their own process to go through. So we would definitely provide support as well. And we also have, there are some family support groups that are run through our agency as well. Good. So there are supports there in place for that as well. So I
think that's just so important because as the short clip showed, as we've talked about, this can happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime.
Any profession, anywhere, any walk of life. Yeah.
Any profession, everyone is worth saving, and we have that opportunity. Jordy's giving me the 2 minutes. So Meredith, is there anything else as we just wrap up that you'd like to share?
I just think it's really important that we know that there's no face to addiction, that this can affect anyone, and that support is really key. And that I've seen lots and lots of people make amazing changes through their life and with support, and make lots and lots of differences in their lives and change their path, and that had to do with whatever support they accessed and what they realized and believed in themselves that they could do this. And so it really is about that compassion and understanding for people that they are struggling, and that they may not be in the place to make that change right now, but if they know that support is there at one point when they're ready, they would know where to find it. So that's
a perfect way to end. Meredith, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for what you do, and it's so important. And like I said, everyone has value. Everyone matters, and we can create change.
Absolutely.
By start talking.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thanks for joining us today. Real Life Talks is a show about learning how to just show up for yourself, just show up for others, be empowered and resilient, and sometimes have difficult conversations that need to be had. So if you want to be able to just show up for yourself and others, my call to action, as always, plan your life, plan your death, and then just love your life to death. And always bring your own tambourine to the party. Thanks. Bye for now. And that's how